Buenos dias or buenas tardes, depending what time it is wherever you are. Today we're going to be making monas de Pascua and pan quemados. These are typical Spanish sweetbreads that are popular at Easter here in Spain. The mona de Pascua is a sweetbread that is typically brought out to picnics, to the beach, to the mountain. Everybody gets together and eats it together, and it's just one of the ways to celebrate Easter. Now, the typical mona usually has a hard-boiled egg in it. Well, a hard-cooked egg because most of the cooking gets done in the oven. You can boil it a little bit ahead of time just to make sure it's fully cooked. Some people just let the entire cooking process be done in the oven, but most people like to boil it just for a few minutes ahead of time just to make sure it's fully cooked. Now, for those who don't like hard-boiled eggs, like me, we have our own hens, but I've never liked hard-boiled eggs. In fact, it's the thing that I like least of anything that I can think of to eat. So, what a lot of kids especially, but adults also, can choose to use a chocolate egg instead. So that's quite common to buy in the supermarket. And you can cook the chocolate egg without any problem, just as long as you leave the foil on and you don't touch it until it's completely cool. Any chocolate that does melt just solidifies again once the mona is finished cooling off. So it completely holds its shape, absolutely no problem cooking the mona with a chocolate egg instead of a hard-boiled egg. Now, for those people who don't want to have to deal with any sort of egg, whether it be chocolate or hard-boiled, we also have the option of pan quemado. Now, pan quemado is usually made in a bigger size, but you can make a smaller one. Look how soft and fluffy this bread is. Now, I absolutely love pan quemado. When I was pregnant with my son, it was one of those things that I had huge cravings for, and I think around Easter time, I ate a full cup pan quemado, the bigger ones, for about a week, and then I had to stop. But this is absolutely delicious. Now, the mona and the pan quemado, they have a distinctive citrus flavor. I like to use the zest of lemons and oranges, but also typically used is what they call esencia or agua de azar. Now, azar is the flowers from citrus, normally the orange tree. Right now, I have in flower my lime trees and my lemon tree. So I've been saving up some flowers to make some of my own. In the supermarket here, they sell this. Those who follow my other blog, Oh the Things We'll Make, and cosascaseras.com, the Spanish counterpart, know that I'm not a huge fan of artificial flavorings, colorings. So I decided I was going to make my own with my orange trees. But today we will be making these. They're absolutely delicious, and I hope you enjoy it. To make the monas, you're going to need some high gluten wheat flour, some sugar, some milk, although you can also use water, egg, both for decoration and in the mona. You'll also need some butter or oil, bread yeast, you can use either fresh yeast or dried active yeast, some lemon and orange zest. Here they tend to use orange blossom water, but if you don't have that, that can be optional. The orange zest is enough. And a little bit of salt. To begin, we're going to make a yeast starter by adding a tablespoon of flour, a tablespoon of sugar, and 3 tablespoons of milk. Here in Spain, they call this the masa madre. It's like sort of like a sourdough starter, but in this case, this is just a way to activate the yeast. Mix this all up well and then add the yeast to it. Here I'm using a fresh yeast, but you can also use active dried or instant yeast instead. Now you really want to break up the yeast well and mix everything together well. And then we're going to cover it and we're going to put it in a warm place and allow it to rise. Now this will start to really bubble and it will form gas, and you'll notice that it should get quite a bit bigger. This is what it looks like after it's been sitting for a while in the warmth. While we're waiting for the yeast to rise, we can start working on the other aspects of the dough. I like to start by zesting an orange and a lemon. This adds a lot of citrus flavor to the final dough. When zesting the lemon and lime, you want to just get the outer part. You want to leave the white pith behind. You don't want that to be part of it. You just want the outer zest that's nice and sweet and adds flavor. The white part is bitter. So you can either use a grater and make sure to grate only the outer portion, or you can use a lemon zester. We can now mix up the rest of the ingredients for the dough. I'm going to combine the dry ingredients, so add the sugar to the flour. You can also add the salt to that and then mix all the dry ingredients together well. Similarly, you'll want to combine the wet ingredients. We're going to add the egg to the zest, and then we're also going to add the milk. We'll then add the liquid oil, or you can also use melted butter like I'm using here. Make sure to combine everything together well. I'm also going to add a little bit of orange blossom water, and another post I will show you how to make your own, but here in Spain they have one available that you can buy in the pastry section of supermarkets. You can now combine the dry ingredients with the wet ingredients. I'm going to pour the dry ingredients into it and whisk everything together well. You'll find that this is going to be a fairly sticky dough, but as we work it, it will actually be quite easy to manipulate. Now that the yeast starter has risen and is ready to use, I'm going to start kneading the dough. I want to knead it for a while before combining it with the yeast starter. You'll find that at first this dough will be quite sticky and it will stick to your hands. I'm only using one hand here at first because I don't want to get both hands completely covered, especially now that I'm filming this for you. But in any case, the more you start working with the dough and pressing on it, it will start to incorporate everything from the bowl and it will be much less sticky. So I'm just going to keep working this for a few minutes, and then once we worked it for a few minutes and kneaded it, then we can add in the yeast starter and incorporate that. Notice that this dough gets quite elastic, and that in part is one of the reasons that we want to use the high gluten flour. The high gluten flour makes for an elastic dough, and it also helps hold the gas so that this dough will rise the way it needs to. Before combining the yeast starter with the rest of the dough, I'm going to prepare a bowl with some oil. This will be used for allowing the finished dough to rise. Now in hindsight, I used too small of a bowl, and later on you'll notice that I used the larger bowl instead, so I had to prepare that one later with oil. But here in the video you get the idea. Now I'm combining the yeast starter with the rest of the dough. And this is a little bit tricky at first because again it gets sticky, and I continue to do this in the bowl because I don't want to feel like I have to add any more flour. Because the dough is so sticky, it's very tempting to want to add more flour to the dough. But you want to try to keep this as light as possible. If you add too much flour, the finished bread will be much more dense. You can see that I decided to move the dough to this bowl that was prepared with the oil because I want to clean this bowl out and use this one to allow the final dough to rise. the dough to the oiled bowl. You want a relatively large bowl because the dough will pretty much double in size. You'll want to cover the bowl and then put it in a warm place. A lot of people like the oven. Most people use either aluminum foil or plastic wrap for this. You can see that I'm using a beeswax cover instead. I like the beeswax wraps because they're more sustainable. This was the first time I was using this one, so I had to warm it a bit and adapt it to the shape of the bowl. Once the dough has risen, we can start to knead it and make it into shapes. The amount of time it takes to rise will depend a lot on the temperature of where you pat it. First, you can prepare a baking sheet by lining it with some parchment paper. Then we're going to open up the dough and then press down on it to allow the air to escape. Now we're going to knead the dough for a while. Because this dough is quite sticky, it's actually best to knead it for a while before you try to move it to a floured surface. We will be moving it to a floured surface in just a second, but I want to knead it for a while first. And you can see that I even used a spatula because of how sticky the dough was. After kneading the dough a while, you'll notice that it's a little bit less sticky, but we're still going to want to move this to a floured surface, and this will allow us to better shape the bread into the forms we want. Continue to knead the dough until you find it's much less sticky and it's much easier to work with. Once you think that you can shape it into forms, then you should be good. Try to resist the urge to add too much flour when you're kneading the bread because it will make for a much more dense bread. You want a light and fluffy, soft, sweet bread instead. You can now cut the dough into portions. For the recipe I've given, 4 portions is a good size unless you want to make a larger pan quemado. But for monas, I'd suggest making 4 even-sized portions. For the traditional shaped mona, I'm going to form the dough into a ball. You can see I separated a little bit of dough out. That's going to be used to cover up the egg. But for now, I'm just going to form the dough into a ball. I'm then going to place the ball of dough on the baking sheet and press into it. This is to make a little space for the egg. Here I'm going to use a chocolate egg. You can use a regular hard-boiled egg, but in this case I'm using chocolate because neither my son nor I are big fans of hard-boiled eggs. Now I'm going to roll this into a snake-like shape, cut it in 2 pieces, and crisscross the dough over the egg. It's fine to use a chocolate egg as long as you keep it wrapped up. It will hold its shape. I'm now going to make a pan quemado. A pan quemado is just like the monas, but they don't have any sort of egg in them. It's just a round bread. This is simple. I'm going to place the dough in a ball on the baking sheet. Some people make a few cuts in the top. Next, I'm going to make a crocodile. I'm going to separate a little portion of dough out to make the legs. Some people just form it right out of the body, but I like to add a little bit of extra leg to it. For the body, just roll the dough into a long shape, making sort of a pointy tail. Usually the tail is curved slightly to one direction or the other. To make the mouth, which is where you're going to place the egg, we're going to cut into the front part with some scissors. Now some people will just cut into this area right here to form the legs. And you can just do that. You don't need to add extra dough to make longer legs or bigger ones. But I like to add a little bit of extra dough to each of the legs just to make them more pronounced. Mona holds the egg inside of his mouth. So we're going to open up the mouth and then place the egg and then just sort of form the dough around it. Gently place the crocodile on the baking sheet and form it the way you want. And then we're going to add some scales to the crocodile to give him just more of a reptilian appearance. To do that, we're just going to make some cuts into the back with some scissors. Use the same kitchen scissors that you use to make the mouth. Later on, I experimented with trying to make a different type of roll by spiraling the dough together, but I didn't like the final outcome, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining what I did. Although you are welcome to try to form the dough into as many shapes as you like. If you're going to make a more traditional Mona with a hard-boiled egg, I recommend boiling the egg for a few minutes before placing it on the dough. Some people just bake the egg and it seems to be enough, but most people like to boil it for at least a few minutes before adding it to the oven. In this case, I poured boiling water over the egg and I allowed the egg to sit in the boiling water for about 5-6 minutes. If you're going to be constantly boiling, 3 or 4 minutes should be plenty. When making the traditional Mona, just do the same thing as you did with the chocolate egg and place the partially boiled egg in place on the Mona. Again, I'm going to use some dough strips to cover it and hold the egg in place. If you don't want to make all of the Monas at this point, you can freeze the dough for later. Once you've formed the shapes, place the tray in a warm place where it will be undisturbed and allow the shapes to rise. In this case, I would have allowed them to rise a little bit further, but to be honest, I was in a hurry to go out to dinner. Ideally, I would have let the shapes rise just a little bit more before painting them with the egg wash. Despite the short rise time, my Monas turned out quite well. I would have liked my pan quemado to have been a little bit higher. Overall, I was pretty happy with the results though. Still, I would suggest starting early in the morning and allow yourself enough time for the dough to rise. Here it was quite cold this year, so it took longer than normal, and I started way too late in the day. Once the shapes have risen, you can gently paint them with a beaten egg. You don't want to press too hard on it because you don't want to have the dough fall again. Once you've painted the dough with the beaten egg, you can cover it with sugar. Don't be stingy with the sugar. At first, I was a little bit on the stingy side, and then I realized that these were much better with more sugar on them. The pan quemado usually has sugar just in a ring around the top. The other ones can just have, the Monas can just have the sugar sprinkled all around them. Apart from the sugar, the modern eggs with chocolate often have little colored sprinkles sprinkled all over the top of them. That's another optional addition that you can try using. You can also give the crocodile some chocolate eyes. If you have chocolate chips, that's perfect. I had to cut chocolate into small pieces because I didn't have any on hand. You can now bake the Monas in an oven that has been preheated to 180 degrees Celsius or around 350 degrees Fahrenheit. You should bake them for around 20 minutes, but it's best to check on them and look to see when they're golden. Mine get a little bit too close together, but look how wonderful the texture is on the spread. It's nice and soft and fluffy. I usually take the finished monas and let them cool off on a baking rack. I think I'm going to cook the pan quemado just a little bit longer to get it to toast up a little bit more. I also wanted to add a little bit more sugar to it. But I'm going to take the crocodile and the other mona and allow them to cool. Okay, I brought my official taste tester here to see if he thinks that these taste as good as the ones that we buy in the store. What do you think?
Very good.
Which one's your favorite?
I don't know.
Like the ones with the chocolate eggs?
Yeah.
Tastes pretty good, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like the ones in the store?
No.
Better?
This one better.
Thumbs up. You can get the full recipe and the detailed instructions at the blog. That's foodtapasandwine.com. I would also love it if you would subscribe and like. Thank you and hasta luego.